My boyfriend mocked me over dinner. He said I looked cheap, that my laugh was annoying. All in Spanish, thinking I was clueless. I smiled the entire time. Then, right before we left, I turned to his family and responded to every single insult, in perfect Spanish. Their laughter cut through the elegant dining room as Marcus whispered, "Yes, Linda, pero tanta," to his smirking family. Pretty, but dumb. That's what my boyfriend of 6 months thought of me. What he didn't know, as I smiled politely across his mother's fine china, was that I spoke fluent Spanish. I'd been collecting their insults all evening like tiny daggers, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal that the American girlfriend they'd been mocking understood every cruel word. Sometimes silence isn't weakness, it's ammunition. I always thought I was good at reading people. Before Marcus Rodriguez, I prided myself on my ability to see beneath the surface, to catch the little tells that revealed someone's true character. But with him, I was blind. Willfully, embarrassingly blind. The morning we met, I was buried in my linguistics textbook at Harper's, the cozy bookstore cafe a few blocks from my graduate campus. I'm Claire Mitchell, 26, working on my master's in communications, and usually far too busy for distractions. The place was packed, every table filled with students hunched over laptops or professionals having early meetings. I barely noticed when someone approached my table. "Excuse me," a voice said, warm and slightly accented. "Would you mind if I shared your table? Everywhere else is full." I looked up into the most captivating brown eyes I'd ever seen. He was tall, with perfectly styled dark hair and a smile that made my carefully constructed walls crumble instantly. "Of course," I said, moving my books to make space. "Please." "I'm Marcus," he said, extending his hand across the table after setting down his coffee. "Claire," I replied, noticing the firmness of his grip, the expensive watch on his wrist. He nodded at my textbook. "Communications. Are you a student at Riverside Graduate Program?" I explained. "Cross-cultural communications specifically." His eyebrows raised. "Impressive. Breaking down barriers between worlds." The way he said it, like he found me genuinely interesting, sent a flush of pleasure through me. "What about you?" I asked. "What do you do?" "Financial consulting," he said, making a face that suggested he found it tedious. "But my passion is literature, South American writers especially, Marquez, Bolano, Ende." We talked for 2 hours that morning, long after my coffee had gone cold. Marcus Rodriguez, I learned, was the son of Colombian immigrants who had built a successful investment firm. He'd been born in Bogota, but raised here since he was 5. He moved between cultures with an effortless grace I envied, quoting Colombian poets one minute and debating American politics the next. When he asked for my number before leaving, I gave it without hesitation. By our third date, I was already falling hard. "You're different," he told me as we walked along the river after dinner, his fingers entwined with mine. "Most American girls I date are so predictable. You have depth." I should have asked what happened to those other predictable American girls. I should have noticed how he constantly drew lines between me and them, as if testing which side I might fall on. But I was too caught up in his compliments, too flattered by his attention. Marcus was everything I thought I wanted: handsome, intelligent, ambitious, with just enough of an edge to keep me fascinated. When he spoke Spanish on calls with his family, the language sounded like music, intimate and rich with emotion I could only guess at. "You should learn Spanish," he'd tease, running his fingers through my blonde hair. "Though maybe not. It's cute when you don't understand." "I took some in high school," I'd reply with a small smile, which wasn't exactly a lie. I just didn't mention the semester abroad in Barcelona, or the advanced conversation classes I'd continued taking through college, or how I'd kept up my practice to the point of near fluency. It hadn't seemed important to mention until later. He'd smile, showing those perfect dimples. "Mamor, you're beautiful enough to not need it." I'd laugh, ignoring how the compliment felt backhanded, like many of his. Marcus had a way of wrapping criticism in charm, making me constantly question if I was being too sensitive. "You're so American sometimes," he'd say when I suggested splitting the check. "I love how you don't care what people think about your clothes." Each comment delivered with such affection that I'd find myself thanking him for the insult. There were other signs, of course. The coldness that would come over him during phone calls with his family, always in Spanish, always ending with laughter I couldn't understand. The way he checked my outfit before we met his friends, suggesting small adjustments that somehow always made me feel less like myself. How he'd introduced me as my American girlfriend, like I was some exotic pet he'd acquired. My best friend Maya noticed. We'd been roommates in college and remained close, the kind of friendship where brutal honesty was both expected and appreciated. "Are you sure about this guy?" she asked one night over wine in my apartment, her legs tucked under her on my sofa. "He seems, I don't know, like he's playing a role." "What do you mean?" I asked, defensive despite myself. "I've seen him with you, and I've seen him when he thinks no one's watching. It's like he's two different people." She took a sip of her wine. "And the way he talks about his family, like they're royalty or something, but he never wants you to meet them. It's weird, Claire." "You don't know him like I do," I defended, swirling my glass. "He's just private, different around family." She raised an eyebrow. "And that doesn't worry you? Who someone is with their family usually tells you a lot." "His family is important to him," I said. "He just wants to make sure the timing is right." 6 months isn't right timing?" Maya pressed. "Look, I'm not trying to be a jerk. I just don't want to see you get hurt." I brushed her concern off with a laugh. What did Maya know? She hadn't seen how Marcus looked at me when we were alone, or felt the electricity when he touched me. She didn't understand the depth of what we shared. 6 months in, I was sure I knew him better than anyone. Then came the invitation. "You should meet my family," he said one Sunday morning as we lay tangled in my sheets, sunlight streaming through the blinds I'd forgotten to close. "Big dinner next weekend. My mom's dying to see the girl who stole my heart." My stomach fluttered with both excitement and nerves. "Really? You've told them about me?" "Of course," he said, but something flashed in his eyes. Amusement, worry. It disappeared too quickly to read. "They want to meet the American girl I can't stop talking about." I sat up, suddenly wide awake. "Wow, that's great. I'd love to meet them." "They'll love you," he said, but there was something in his tone that didn't quite match his words. "Just be yourself." "Well, maybe a slightly more conservative version of yourself." I laughed, thinking he was joking. He wasn't. Over the next few days, Marcus kept bringing up the dinner, making it sound less like a casual family gathering and more like some kind of test I was in danger of failing. "Just smile and be polite," he reminded me more than once. "My mother can be traditional, and my sister Isabella is, well, she's protective of me. Just follow my lead, and you'll be fine." By the time the dinner was 3 days away, I'd worked myself into such a state of anxiety that I went shopping for a new outfit, discarding option after option as too casual, too revealing, too American. I finally settled on a conservative yet elegant navy dress that hit just below the knee with a modest neckline and three-quarter sleeves. I practiced basic Spanish phrases in the mirror, rehearsing until my pronunciation seemed passable. I researched Colombian customs and traditions until my eyes burned from staring at my laptop screen. "You're overthinking this," Maya said when I called her in a panic the night before. "It's dinner, not a UN summit." "His family is important to him," I insisted, pacing my apartment. "I want them to like me." There was a pause on the line. "Claire, you sure you know this guy? I mean, really know him?" I laughed off her concern. "Of course I do. We've been together 6 months. Time doesn't equal transparency," she said. But I was already changing the subject, too nervous about tomorrow to hear her concerns. Saturday evening arrived with perfect early summer weather, warm with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of jasmine from somewhere nearby. Marcus picked me up in his sleek silver BMW, whistling appreciatively when I opened my door. "You look beautiful," he said, kissing my cheek. "Very appropriate." The word landed awkwardly, but I smiled through it. "Thank you. I want to make a good impression." The drive to his parents' home took us through increasingly affluent neighborhoods until we turned onto a private drive lined with mature oak trees. The Rodriguez home was a large stucco house in the hills, surrounded by carefully manicured gardens that must have required a full-time staff to maintain. The moment Marcus pulled into the circular driveway, my mouth went dry. This wasn't just a family home. It was a statement of success, of permanence. "Ready?" Marcus squeezed my hand, but the pressure felt like a warning, not comfort. The front door opened before we reached it. A woman who could only be Marcus's mother emerged, elegant in a silk blouse and tailored pants, her hair in a perfect chignon, her smile wide but not reaching her eyes. "Bienvenida, Claire." She pulled me into a tight hug that smelled of expensive perfume. "We've heard so much about you." Behind her stood Marcus's father, tall, stern, with the same dark eyes as his son, but none of the warmth, and a young woman who had to be his sister, Isabella. She was stunning with sharp cheekbones and a cool appraisal that made me feel instantly inadequate. "It's lovely to meet you all," I said, hoping my voice didn't betray my nerves. "Thank you for having me." "Our pleasure," his father said, his English perfect but formal. "Marcus speaks very highly of you." The house inside was overwhelming and elegant, filled with family photos in silver frames, religious icons displayed in glass cases, and artwork that looked valuable enough to require special insurance. Everything was immaculate, not a cushion out of place. As Marcus gave me a tour, showing off the formal living room, the study lined with leather-bound books, the sunroom that overlooked the garden, I noticed something odd. The glances exchanged between him and Isabella, the way his mother's smile stiffened when I admired a painting, the laughter that happened just after I'd speak. It was subtle, like catching movement from the corner of your eye, but it was there. "Your home is beautiful," I said to his mother as we moved toward the dining room. "Gracias," she replied, giving Marcus a look I couldn't quite interpret. "We like nice things." I felt the first real chill of the evening. Something was off. I just couldn't put my finger on what. The dining room was as intimidating as the rest of the house. A long mahogany table set with china that looked too delicate to eat from, crystal glasses that caught the light from an elaborate chandelier, and fresh flowers arranged with professional precision. A woman in a black and white uniform was quietly placing the final touches on the table. "Sit here next to Marcus," his mother directed, pointing to a chair that put me directly across from Isabella. I smiled gratefully, smoothing my dress as I sat. From the moment we sat down, Marcus slid seamlessly into Spanish with his family. I kept my expression neutral, pretending to understand nothing beyond the most basic phrases. "Mama, el vino que trajimos," Marcus said, handing his mother the bottle we'd brought. She examined the label and gave a small shrug. "Americano," she said with a note of disappointment. I pretended not to notice, keeping my smile fixed as I glanced around the table. Marcus's father was watching me with detached curiosity, like I was an unusual specimen in a lab. "Gracias por invitarme a su casa," I said carefully, using one of the phrases I'd practiced. "Thank you for inviting me to your home." There was a beat of silence, then a ripple of what sounded like suppressed laughter. Marcus's mother recovered first. "De nada," she replied, exchanging a glance with Isabella. "Our home is your home." The maid appeared with the first course, a soup I didn't recognize, but that smelled amazing. I complimented it, genuinely impressed. "La sopa está deliciosa," I said, thinking my Spanish sounded decent enough. "Ella parece una tipa barata de Instagram," Isabella murmured to Marcus, not even bothering to lower her voice. "She looks like a cheap Instagram girl." I kept my spoon moving steadily to my mouth, pretending I hadn't understood. My cheeks burned, but I didn't let my smile falter. Marcus laughed, not the laugh I knew, but something harder, meaner. "Linda, pero tonta," he agreed. "Pretty, but dumb." His mother snorted delicately. I gripped my napkin under the table, twisting the fabric between my fingers until my knuckles turned white. The soup bowls were cleared, and a fish course followed. I complimented that too, determined to be the perfect guest, even as the knot in my stomach tightened. I'd learned Spanish in high school, then got fluent during my semester in Barcelona. I'd kept it up with conversation groups and online classes, enjoying the secret skill, the window into another world. I'd never told Marcus. It had never seemed important until now. As the meal progressed, I began counting their insults. My laugh, molesta, annoying. My clothes, like an American waitress. My conversation, without depth. Each barb landed like a tiny dart, barely visible but stinging all the same. I kept smiling, kept eating tiny bites of each immaculately prepared dish, kept nodding as if I understood nothing. "She's very blonde, isn't she?" Marcus's father said in English, addressing his son while looking directly at me. "Dad likes to tease," Marcus told me, patting my hand, then in Spanish to his father. "She's not as vacant as she looks." More laughter. I took a sip of wine, wondering if they could see my hand trembling. The worst moment came when his father asked in Spanish if I was the one. Marcus chuckled and shook his head. "She's a good filler until I go back to Colombia," he replied, as casually as if discussing the weather. My stomach turned, but I didn't react. I made polite conversation with his sister, who responded curtly while glaring at my wine glass. I was on my second, and apparently that was one too many for proper company. So, Claire, Marcus's mother said in English as dessert arrived, a delicate flan with espresso. Marcus tells us you're in graduate school. Yes, I said, grateful for the chance to speak English again. I'm getting my master's in communications. How practical, she replied in a tone that suggested it was anything but. And how did you two meet? She continued, stirring her coffee. Marcus is usually so selective. I recited the bookstore story with a smile, aware that as I spoke, Marcus was murmuring something in Spanish to Isabella that made her smirk. Such a romantic, his mother said when I finished. Don't you think, honey? She directed this at Marcus's father, who merely grunted. Claire doesn't need romance, Marcus said, squeezing my shoulder. She's very, what's the word, accommodating. The double meaning wasn't lost on his family, who exchanged knowing looks. I smiled wider than ever, because I had a plan now, and I wasn't going to let them see it coming. The dinner continued, each course more elaborate than the last. The main dish was a tender beef that melted in my mouth, served with tiny roasted potatoes and vegetables I couldn't identify. I ate mechanically, tasting nothing, every sense focused on the conversation happening around me. Marcus tells us you grew up in Vermont, his father asked, his English precise and formal. Yes, in Burlington, I replied. My father is a professor of environmental science there. Ah, academia, he said with a slight smile. Very idealistic. Papa was a professor before he went into finance, Marcus interjected. I nodded as if this was new information, watching his father's expression soften slightly when discussing his past. It was the first genuine emotion I'd seen from him all evening. Did you enjoy teaching? I asked him directly. Very much, he replied, seeming surprised by my interest. But academia doesn't pay for houses like this. He gestured around him with his wine glass. It's not always about money, I said carefully. Easy to say when you have plenty. The family dynamic was becoming clearer. Marcus's father was the practical one, driven by success and status. His mother was the guardian of propriety and tradition. Isabella seemed to be the rebel, though her rebellion appeared to be strictly within acceptable boundaries. And Marcus, I was beginning to wonder if I knew him at all. Would you like more wine, Claire? His mother asked, eyeing my nearly empty glass. No, thank you, I replied, noting how she relaxed slightly at my refusal. The food is so delicious. I want to enjoy it fully. Sí, pero uno americana, she said to her husband. The girl knows when to stop, surprising for an American. I pretended to be fascinated by my plate. Marcus's hand found my knee under the table, squeezing slightly. I resisted the urge to push it away. Claire is studying cross-cultural communication, he told his family in English. She's very interested in how people from different backgrounds interact. Is that so? His father asked, his interest seeming genuine for the first time. And what have you learned? I looked directly at him. That people often say one thing to your face and another behind your back, especially when they think you can't understand them. There was a moment of silence. Marcus's hand tightened on my knee. How very insightful, his mother finally said, her smile tight. Marcus, did you tell Claire about the time you spent in New York? The subject changed smoothly. The moment of tension passed, but I had seen the flash of unease in their eyes. They were wondering if I'd meant something by my comment. As dessert was served, I found myself studying Marcus with new eyes. The way he deferred to his father, the careful way he monitored his mother's reactions, the competitive edge in his interactions with Isabella. Here in his family home, he wasn't the confident, charming man I thought I knew. He was performing, just as he had been with me all along. So, Claire, Marcus's mother asked as I took a delicate bite of flan, how long have you two been seeing each other? 6 months, I replied. Marcus, que tiempo largo, his mother smiled thinly. And is it serious? I felt Marcus tense beside me. Mama, por favor, he said quietly. It's a simple question, she replied in English. A mother likes to know these things. I placed my spoon down carefully. I think that's something Marcus and I are still figuring out, I said diplomatically. Smart girl, his father said, nodding. No need to rush these things. Especially when she's not the right one, his mother added in Spanish. thinking I couldn't understand. I took a sip of water, letting the coolness soothe my throat, which felt tight with unshed tears, not of sadness, but of rage. As the dinner finally wound down, Marcus seemed to relax, clearly thinking we'd made it through unscathed. He had no idea what was coming. As I spooned the last bite of flan into my mouth, Isabella suddenly leaned forward, her eyes assessing me directly. "How long did you say you've been with my brother?" she asked, her English perfect but clipped. 6 months, I replied, keeping my tone light. Demasiado tiempo, she muttered to Marcus. Too long. I catalogued every cruel comment, every smug grin Marcus shared with his family. I wasn't just being mocked. I was being paraded as a joke, a temporary amusement, until he returned to the life they clearly thought he deserved. Between dessert and coffee, Marcus leaned close, his breath warm on my ear. "You doing okay?" he whispered, snake-like with syrup in his voice. I nodded, meeting his eyes. "This has been eye-opening." He smiled, clearly misinterpreting my meaning. His hand squeezed my knee under the table, a possessive gesture that now made my skin crawl. As Marcus's mother began discussing some family event, my mind drifted to a conversation with Maya 3 months into my relationship with Marcus. We had been browsing through a bookstore, much like the one where I'd met him. Maya picked up a novel, turning it over to read the back cover. "So, things are going well with Mr. Perfect?" she asked, not looking up from the book. "Really well," I said, smiling. "He's taking me to that new rooftop restaurant on Friday." She replied, putting the book back on the shelf. "Can I ask you something without you getting defensive?" I laughed. "That's never a good start to a question." "He talks down to you, Claire," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "You laugh it off, but he does it a lot." I felt my defenses rise immediately. "He's just teasing. It's how we are together." "No," she'd insisted, putting down the book she was examining. "It's how he is with you. There's a difference." "You're being dramatic," I told her. "He's funny and sarcastic. It's just his sense of humor." "If you say so," she replied, but her expression remained concerned. "Just pay attention to how he makes you feel. Not just when things are good, but after you've spent time with him. If you feel smaller instead of bigger, that's not love." Another memory surfaced, a party at his friend Diego's apartment about 4 months into our relationship. Marcus had his arm slung around my shoulders, 3 drinks in and louder than usual. "My American trophy," he'd announced to the room, kissing my temple. Everyone laughed, and I laughed too, thinking he was being playful. Now I understood. I'd never been a partner to him. I'd been a novelty, an exotic diversion, something to show off and then discard. I watched his parents carefully throughout the dessert course. His mother clearly saw me as beneath them, an unfortunate phase her son was going through. His father looked disinterested, almost amused by my presence, like I was some entertainment provided for the evening. When Marcus's mother asked if I'd traveled much, I deliberately dumbed down my response. "Just Florida for spring break," I said, though I'd actually backpacked through Europe for 6 months after college. "Americans," his father muttered in Spanish to Isabella. "Their idea of culture is Disney World." I nodded eagerly, as if I thought they were agreeing with me. Their smugness was palpable, and somehow feeding it made my planned revelation feel all the more satisfying. The maid brought coffee in delicate china cups. I watched as Marcus's mother directed her in rapid Spanish, her tone imperious. The young woman, probably not much older than me, kept her eyes down, her movements efficient. I wondered how many times she'd been mocked in this same dining room after serving guests like me. "Cream or sugar?" Marcus's mother asked me in English. "Just black, thank you," I replied. "Como su alma," Isabella murmured, "black like her soul." Marcus snorted, trying to disguise it as a cough. I took a careful sip of the bitter coffee, savoring the burn on my tongue. Marcus told a joke in Spanish about gringas and white bread that made them all erupt in laughter. I smiled blankly, as if I hadn't heard the punchline that compared American women to bread, pale, soft, and with no flavor. The evening was winding down. Marcus's father had poured himself another brandy, and his mother was discussing some charity gala they would be attending next weekend. "I hope you stay sweet, Claire," his mother said, reaching across to pat my hand. "Don't try too hard. It's unbecoming." The condescension in her voice was unmistakable. I just nodded, allowing a flicker of confusion to cross my face, as if I wasn't quite sure what she meant. As the maid cleared the dessert plates, I caught Marcus's father's eye. Gracias por la cena, I said softly, making sure my pronunciation was perfect. Thank you for the dinner. He froze, coffee cup halfway to his lips. Marcus looked at me sharply, eyes narrowing. Isabella's mouth opened slightly. I just smiled, the same placid smile I'd worn all evening. But inside, I felt something shift, the balance of power tilting ever so slightly in my direction. The storm was gathering, and I was ready to let it break. As Marcus's father set down his cup with a sharp clink against the saucer, the silence in the room became charged. His mother's smile had faltered, and Isabella was sitting straighter in her chair, suddenly alert. Pardon, Marcus's father said, his voice careful. I maintained my innocent expression. I was just thanking you for dinner, I replied in English, blinking as if confused by his reaction. Marcus laughed, a nervous sound I'd never heard from him before. She's picked up a few phrases from me, he explained to his family in Spanish. Cute, right? His mother nodded, relief crossing her features. Yes, very quaint. But his father was still watching me, suspicion lingering in his gaze. I met his eyes briefly before looking away, as if intimidated. The conversation resumed, but with a new undercurrent of caution. Marcus kept glancing at me, his usual confidence wavering. Tell Claire about the beach house in Cartagena, his mother suggested, clearly trying to steer the conversation to safer waters. Marcus began describing their family vacation home, but I noticed he was choosing his words carefully now, speaking more English than Spanish. It sounds beautiful, I said when he finished. I'd love to see Colombia someday. Oh, his mother replied. Marcus hasn't mentioned taking you. The barb was delivered with a smile, but I felt it all the same. No, I agreed. He hasn't. Isabella, seeming to sense my changed mood, tried to reclaim control. Probably because Americans don't appreciate the real Colombia, she said in Spanish to her brother. They want resorts and tourist traps. I studied my coffee cup, letting the insult land without reaction. The counter on my mental tally clicked higher. Marcus's father leaned forward. What do you hope to do with your communications degree, Claire? He asked in English, his tone suggesting he found the field trivial. I'm specializing in cross-cultural communications, I replied. There's so much misunderstanding that happens between people who speak different languages. For a moment, I thought I'd given too much away. Marcus's expression flickered, but then he relaxed, apparently deciding I was speaking generally. Language barriers can be challenging, his mother agreed with a pointed look at her son. Sometimes they're convenient, I said mildly. People often say things they wouldn't if they thought everyone understood. The table went quiet again. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the tension I'd created. Marcus cleared his throat. Maybe we should go soon, he suggested. Claire has an early class tomorrow. I didn't, but I nodded agreement. It's been such an interesting evening. As we prepared to leave, Marcus's mother pulled him aside, whispering furiously in Spanish. I caught fragments, not serious and temporary among them. His father approached me while Marcus was distracted. You've been quiet tonight, he observed. I've been listening, I replied. Something in my tone made him study me more carefully. Yes, he said slowly. I imagine you have. Marcus returned, slipping his arm around my waist. Ready, mi amor? The endearment that once made my heart flutter now turned my stomach. I nodded, saying my goodbyes to his family with perfect politeness. As we walked to the car, Marcus seemed relieved. That went well, he said, squeezing my shoulder. They liked you. I didn't answer immediately, watching the house recede in the side mirror as we drove away. The perfect facade, both his and mine, was about to shatter. Did they? I finally asked. I got a different impression. Marcus frowned slightly. What do you mean? I looked out the window at the passing streetlights, each one illuminating my face for a moment before darkness returned. Just that people aren't always what they seem, I said quietly. He laughed, but it sounded hollow. You're overthinking, Claire. Everything's fine. I nodded, letting him believe that for now. The confrontation could wait until we weren't in a moving vehicle. But it was coming. The storm clouds had gathered, dark and heavy with 6 months of lies and mockery, and I was finally ready to let the rain fall. The ride back to my apartment was tense. Marcus kept glancing at me, his usual confidence replaced by something I'd never seen in him before: uncertainty. "You're quiet," he said, turning down the radio. "Did something happen?" I watched the streetlights flash by, each one illuminating his perfect profile for a split second before returning him to shadow. 6 months of lies, 6 months of thinking I was the lucky one. "I was just thinking about your family," I said carefully. "They loved you," he insisted, reaching for my hand. I let him take it, though his touch now felt foreign. "My mother said you were charming." "Did she?" I asked. "In English or Spanish?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "What does that matter?" "Just curious." We rode in silence for another mile before he tried again. "Look, I know my family can be a bit intense, but they mean well." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. The anger I'd been suppressing all evening was building, a pressure behind my ribs that threatened to explode. I focused on my breathing, on the plan taking shape in my mind. "Want to come up?" I asked when he pulled up to my building. "For coffee?" Relief washed over his face. "Sure, I'd like that." My apartment was small but cozy, filled with books and photos and the little treasures I'd collected during my travels. Marcus had always treated it like a quaint curiosity, so different from his sleek downtown condo with its minimalist furniture and stark white walls. I put water on to boil while Marcus made himself comfortable on my sofa, scrolling through his phone. A text chimed and he smiled at the screen. "Your sister?" I asked, leaning against the kitchen counter. "Yeah," he replied, typing a response. "She wants to know if you survived the Inquisition." "What are you telling her?" "That you were perfect," he said, setting his phone down. "The perfect American girlfriend." I walked over slowly, sitting on the coffee table directly across from him. Our knees almost touched. "Can I ask you something, Marcus?" He leaned forward, taking my hands. "Of course, mi amor, anything." "What does linda pero tonta mean?" The color drained from his face. His hands went slack in mine. "What about barata como una tipa de Instagram? I'm particularly interested in that one." Marcus's eyes widened. Or how about she's a good filler until I go back to Colombia? That was my personal favorite. The silence in my apartment was deafening. I could hear the water beginning to boil in the kitchen, the tick of the clock on my wall, the blood rushing in my ears. "Wait, you speak Spanish?" Marcus finally managed, his voice barely above a whisper. I withdrew my hands from his. "Fluently," I said, "since I was 16. "It's really helped tonight." He stood abruptly, running his hand through his hair. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Why didn't you tell me I was just a temporary amusement?" I countered, remaining seated. "Why didn't you tell me your family would mock and humiliate me at dinner?" "It wasn't like that," he started, but I cut him off. "It was exactly like that," I said, my voice steady despite the rage churning inside me. "You brought me there to be laughed at, to prove something to your family, that you could bag the dumb blonde American girl." "Claire, please." "I sat there for 3 hours," I continued, standing now. 3 hours of listening to you and your family tear me apart in a language you thought I couldn't understand. Your sister called me cheap. Your mother said I wasn't good enough for you. And you?" My voice broke slightly. "You said I was just filling time." Marcus's face had gone from pale to flushed. "It was just family teasing," he said weakly. "It didn't mean anything." "It meant everything," I replied. "It showed me exactly who you are when you think I can't understand you." He took a step toward me. "Look, I'm sorry if some things got lost in translation." "Nothing got lost," I interrupted. "Everything was crystal clear. You've been playing me for 6 months." "That's not true," he protested. "I care about you." "You care about having a blonde American trophy to parade around," I said. "Someone who won't challenge you or see through your act." "That's not fair." "Fair?" I laughed bitterly. "Was it fair to listen to your sister call me a cheap Instagram girl? Was it fair when you agreed that I was pretty but dumb? Was any of tonight fair, Marcus?" He had the decency to look ashamed. "My family is complicated," he said. "You don't understand the pressure." "I understand perfectly," I cut in. "I understand that you're a coward who can't stand up to his family. I understand that you've been living a double life, the charming boyfriend with me and the sneering son with them." "It's not that simple," he argued, desperation creeping into his voice. "Yes, tonight was bad, but my feelings for you are real." "Which feelings?" I asked. "The ones you express in English to my face or the ones you share in Spanish behind my back?" Marcus sank back onto the sofa, head in his hands. I've made a terrible mistake, he said. I never thought you'd understand. That's the problem, isn't it? I said quietly. You never thought I'd understand. You never thought I had depth or intelligence or the capacity to see through you. That's not true, he insisted, looking up at me with pleading eyes. Let me explain. I think you've explained enough, I said, walking to the door and opening it. We're done, Marcus. Lose my number. You're fluent in lies, but I don't translate those anymore. He stood slowly, disbelief written across his face. You're breaking up with me? Just like that? Just like that, I confirmed. Though I'd say you broke us long before tonight. Claire, please, he begged. We can fix this. Let me talk to my family. There's nothing to fix, I said firmly. Tonight wasn't a misunderstanding, it was a revelation. Don't do this, he said, moving toward the door but not leaving. Let's talk tomorrow when we're both calmer. Goodbye, Marcus, I said, my voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. Que tengas buena suerte en tu vida. Wishing him well in the language he never thought I'd master was my final act of defiance. He stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me for the first time. Then, without another word, he walked out. I closed the door behind him, leaning against it as my legs threatened to give way. The kettle in the kitchen was whistling furiously. Like me, it had reached its boiling point. Marcus blew up my phone for days. Texts, voice notes, even flowers at my door with apology cards I never read. I ignored them all, watching as his messages evolved from apologetic to angry to pleading. You're overreacting, one text read. It was just family banter. Another, I miss you, please call me. And finally, you owe me a chance to explain. I owed him nothing. I blocked his number a week after the dinner. But I wasn't just angry. I was disappointed in him, yes, but also in myself. How could I have missed the signs? How could I have been so willfully blind? The Monday after blocking him, I met with Maya at our favorite cafe, the one with mismatched chairs and poetry readings on Thursday nights. She was already waiting when I arrived, 2 lattes on the table. You look like hell, she said bluntly as I slid into my seat. Thanks, I replied, managing a small smile. I feel worse. I told her everything, the dinner, the insults, the confrontation afterward. She listened without interrupting, her eyes growing wider with each detail. When I finished, she didn't say, I told you so. She just reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm so proud of you, she said. That took guts. It took too long, I admitted. I should have seen it sooner. We all have blind spots when it comes to love, she said. The important thing is you saw the truth eventually and had the strength to walk away. We sat in companionable silence for a moment, sipping our coffees. A memory surfaced. My high school Spanish teacher, Mrs. Valdez, a tiny woman with enormous energy who had instilled in me a love for the language. Language is power, she used to tell us. When you learn to speak someone else's tongue, you gain access to their world. Never let anyone silence you. I'd carried those words with me through college, through my semester in Barcelona, through my continued studies. But somewhere along the way with Marcus, I'd allowed myself to be silenced. I'd played small to make him feel big. What now? Maya asked, interrupting my thoughts. Now I pick up the pieces, I said, and make sure I never ignore red flags again. That night, I sat on my bedroom floor and journaled everything that had happened, not to wallow, but to remember. To create a record of the signs I'd missed, the compromises I'd made, the times I'd felt diminished but had rationalized away my feelings. Not to punish myself, but to ensure I never lowered my standards again. 3 days later, a direct message appeared on my Instagram from Isabella, Marcus's sister. I almost deleted it without reading, but curiosity won out. I didn't know you understood, it read. I'm sorry for laughing. What we did was cruel. I stared at the message for a long time, my finger hovering over the reply button. In the end, I closed the app without responding. Her apology wasn't for me. It was to ease her own conscience. I didn't owe her absolution. The following weekend, I was organizing photos on my laptop when I came across a video I'd taken of Marcus months ago. We'd been at a restaurant and he was telling a story about a server at another table who had a thick Eastern European accent. In the video, he was mimicking the man's speech pattern, exaggerating it for laughs. I hadn't noticed it then, how cruel the imitation was, how the humor relied entirely on mockery. Now it made me sick. I deleted the video along with every picture of Marcus on my phone and social media. It felt like cleaning house, like removing a toxin from my system. The next week, I forced myself to go out, not to a bar or club where the goal was to meet someone new. I wasn't ready for that, but to a salsa bar downtown that offered dance lessons on Wednesday nights. I went alone, ignoring the flutter of anxiety in my stomach as I entered the crowded space. For 2 hours, I danced. I laughed when I stumbled, accepted guidance from the instructor, and felt the music move through me like a cleansing wave. I wasn't performing for anyone. I wasn't trying to be perfect. I was just being. As I walked home that night, I realized I was reconnecting with the version of myself that existed before Marcus, the woman who didn't apologize for taking up space, who found joy in learning and growing, who didn't need anyone's approval to feel worthy. 2 weeks after the dinner from hell, I received an email that made me pause. A bilingual marketing agency was offering me a position, Spanish fluency required. It was the job I'd applied for months ago but had almost forgotten about in the chaos of my personal life. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the offer letter. Full circle, I whispered to myself, a smile spreading across my face. That night, I called my parents to share the news. They were thrilled, especially my father, who had always encouraged my language studies. "I'm proud of you, kiddo," he said, "not just for the job." "Maya told us about what happened with that guy," I groaned. "She shouldn't have." "She was worried about you," my mother chimed in. "And she wanted us to know how strong you were being." "I don't feel strong," I admitted. "I feel foolish." "Recognizing when someone isn't treating you right and walking away, that takes strength," my father said. "A lot of people never get there." After we hung up, I sat on my balcony watching the city lights, feeling something settle inside me. I wasn't broken, just bruised. And sometimes bruises remind you of the fights worth walking away from. A month later, I heard through mutual friends that Marcus had moved back to Colombia. Apparently, his father had connections at a prestigious investment bank in Bogota, and a position had suddenly become available. I felt nothing at the news, just relief that I wouldn't have to worry about running into him around town. Life settled into a new rhythm. I started my job at the marketing agency, using my Spanish daily to bridge worlds between clients and consumers. On weekends, I began teaching beginner Spanish classes at a community center downtown, mostly to young girls whose parents wanted them to have an edge in an increasingly global world. "Why do you want to learn Spanish?" I asked my students on the first day. "My mom says it will help me get a job someday," one girl replied. "I want to understand the lyrics to Bad Bunny songs," said another, making the class laugh. "I want to travel the world and talk to everyone," said a shy girl in the back, her eyes bright with possibility. That was the answer that resonated with me. Language as connection, as a door to new experiences and understandings. I made it my mission to not just teach them vocabulary and grammar, but to give them the confidence my teacher had given me, to speak up, to make mistakes, to find their voice in another language. 3 months after the disastrous dinner, I wrote an anonymous piece about my experience titled "Language and Love: What I Learned When My Boyfriend Didn't Know I Understood His Insults." I submitted it to an online publication on a whim, not expecting much. It went viral on Medium within days. Comments poured in from people sharing similar stories, of partners who belittled them in other languages, of in-laws who thought their cultural differences gave them license to be cruel, of the moment they finally stood up for themselves. "Your story made me realize I deserve better," one comment read. I left him yesterday. I hadn't written the piece for validation or revenge. I'd written it to process my experience, to transform it from something that happened to me into something I could control. But knowing it had helped others made the pain worthwhile in a way I hadn't anticipated. To celebrate the success of the article and my new job, Maya and I planned a trip to Costa Rica, a place I'd always wanted to visit but had put off because Marcus had insisted we save for a trip to Colombia instead. The irony wasn't lost on me. For 10 days, we hiked through rainforests, lounged on beaches, and explored local markets. I negotiated everything in Spanish, haggling with vendors, chatting with our tour guides, ordering food in tiny local restaurants far from the tourist paths. It felt like a quiet reclaiming of something that had been tainted by my relationship with Marcus. On our last night, we went to a beach cafe where locals gathered to watch the sunset. The air was heavy with salt and promise, the sky a riot of pink and orange as the sun sank into the Pacific. I was sipping a cold beer when a man approached our table. He was tall with sun-streaked hair and an easy smile. "Mind if I join you?" he asked in English tinged with a slight accent I couldn't place. "I'm Alejandro. I own this place." Maya kicked me under the table, her eyes wide with encouragement. I nodded and Alejandro pulled up a chair. We talked as the sky darkened and stars emerged. He was Costa Rican but had spent years in Australia, which explained the unusual accent. He was intelligent, funny, and most importantly, he listened. Really listened, without interrupting or one-upping or dismissing. "What brings you to Costa Rica?" he asked. "A celebration," I replied. "New job, new chapter." "And what was the old chapter?" I hesitated, then decided on honesty. "A relationship that wasn't what I thought it was." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Those can be the hardest to leave, but the most necessary." As the night progressed, Maya made an excuse about being tired and headed back to our hotel, shooting me a not-so-subtle thumbs up as she left. Alejandro and I continued talking, moving from casual conversation to deeper topics. His dreams of expanding his cafe into a cultural center, my passion for using language to connect people. "Do you speak Spanish?" he asked, switching to the language seamlessly. "Fluently," I replied in kind. "That's refreshing," he said. "Most tourists don't bother." "I believe in meeting people where they are," I told him. "Language is the first step." He smiled, and something warm unfurled in my chest. Not the desperate, consuming attraction I'd felt with Marcus, but something quieter and more substantial. "Can I ask you something personal?" I said as he walked me back to my hotel later. "Of course." "Do you ever make fun of your dates in a language she might not understand?" He laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "Only if I want to get slapped. Why would anyone do that?" "You'd be surprised," I said softly. He stopped walking, turning to face me. "Someone did that to you?" I nodded. "And you understood every word?" He whistled low. "I bet that didn't end well for them." "It ended exactly as it should have," I replied. We reached my hotel, and Alejandro wrote his number on a napkin from his cafe. "If you're ever back in Costa Rica," he said, handing it to me, "or if you just want to practice your Spanish." I took it, our fingers brushing. "Thank you for a lovely evening." "Thank you for sharing your story," he replied. "Not everyone has the courage to walk away from something that diminishes them." I watched him leave, the napkin with his number clutched in my hand. I didn't know if Alejandro would be something. It was too soon, and we lived in different countries, and I was still healing. But I did know this: I'd never again pretend not to hear. I'd never again make myself small to make someone else feel big. I'd never again mistake cruelty for charm. Back in my room, I stood on the balcony overlooking the ocean, listening to the rhythmic crash of waves against the shore. I thought about how far I'd come since that dinner, not just geographically, but emotionally. I'd reclaimed my voice, my confidence, my sense of self, because now I wasn't just fluent in Spanish. I was fluent in myself, my worth, my boundaries, my truth. And that was a language no one could ever take from me again. The morning of our departure, as we waited for the shuttle to the airport, I received a text from Alejandro. "Safe travels. The cafe will be here when you're ready to return." I smiled, typing back, "Gracias por escuchar." Thank you for listening. Because in the end, that's what we all want: to be heard, to be understood, to be valued for exactly who we are. Not despite our differences, but because of them. Not as temporary amusements, but as equal partners in the complex, beautiful dance of human connection. I boarded the plane with Maya, ready to return home. Not to the place I'd been, but to the woman I'd become. Strong, certain, fluent in the language of self-respect. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't translating myself for anyone. Have you ever pretended not to understand something only to realize your silence taught you everything you needed to know? If this story resonated with you, like and subscribe for more tales of women who turn underestimation into their greatest strength.